Hi guys, Sean here from digiDirect. Now today we're going to be taking a first look at the recently announced Nikon D7500. Now this camera is not out until June, but fortunately we've been able to take a look at a pre-production unit here. We're going to go through all the features and specs and so on of the camera, also the body of course. Now since it is a pre-production camera, unfortunately I'm not allowed to show you guys any photos from the camera, but we'll discuss all the important points still. Now the D7500 is positioned as kind of a baby brother camera to the Nikon D500. That was a camera they put out last year, which was pretty much universally well received. The D500 was especially good for sports and action photography. It had a really good autofocus system, a very big buffer on it. We'll see that the D7500 inherits some of the features from the D500, not everything certainly, but it does come in quite a bit, first of all, lighter than the D500 and also significantly cheaper than the D500. So it's kind of positioned as a camera for someone who wants a lot of the functionality of the D500, not everything, but much of it, but they don't want to pay the full, kind of $3,000, which is what the D500 goes for here in Australia. They want something a bit cheaper than that. But we'll start with a look at the body of the D7500. So if you're familiar with the body of the D7200, which is the predecessor to this camera, this is going to look pretty familiar. The camera has much the same layout as that camera, with an array of buttons along the side and the top of the camera, as well as an LCD screen over at the top right-hand side over here. Comparing it to the D500, for example, the D500 had a couple extra controls, notably a joystick, which you don't find on this camera here. One new thing that the D7500 has over the D7200 though is the addition of a tilting screen. The screen on the D7200 was fixed, you couldn't tilt it or anything. It's not a fully articulating screen on the D7500, but it does tilt upwards and downwards. So that's very nice, especially when shooting video, which we'll touch on in a moment here as well. The screen is also a touch screen, and we can use touch autofocus here as well, even in video, which is nice. It's a solid feeling body, it feels very well built. It's fully weather sealed. And it also has built-in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, which you can use with Nikon's SnapBridge app. Although here's where we're going to see one of the biggest idiosyncrasies with this camera, and that's the SD card slots. So the older D7200 had dual SD card slots. The D500 has an SD card and an XQD card slot, but the D7500 only has a single SD card slot. It's a bit puzzling and unfortunate. It certainly would have been nice if this camera had dual SD card slots, especially considering that feature is on the D7200. But a lot of the more powerful features on the D7500 are under the hood. So it has a 20.9 megapixel sensor on it. It's an APS-C size sensor, of course. That's the exact same as on the D500. It has a pretty decent 51-point autofocus system. That's very, very similar to what's on the D7200. It's quite good at tracking movement and being speedy and acquiring focus quickly. It's not quite as good as the 153-point autofocus system that's on the D500, which also has some more advanced features like 3D tracking and so on, but quite a capable autofocus system certainly. It also can shoot at 8 frames per second with full autofocus and auto exposure tracking. So that kind of sits right in the middle between the D7200, which can shoot 6 frames per second, and the D500, which can shoot 10. Now, one big improvement on the D7500 over the D7200 before it is its buffer size. So the D7200 has a good autofocus system, again, very similar to what's in this one, but it was kind of difficult to shoot longer action shots because it didn't have a very big buffer. You can only shoot a very short string of continuous shots. The D500 went the other way with that, and it has a huge buffer of 200 raw photos or unlimited JPEGs. The D7500 again falls somewhere in the middle. So you've got 50 raw photos or 100 JPEGs that you can shoot continuously. If you're shooting at the max frames per second of 8 frames per second, you're looking at about 6 seconds in RAW or 12.5 seconds in JPEG, which is quite a long time when you're looking at action sequences. They usually don't last longer than that. So the D7500 is going to be quite good at shooting action sequences, something that the D7200 was not very good at. Another page that the D7500 has taken from the D500's book is 4K video. So you can shoot 4K video at up to 30 frames per second on the D7500. It also does have a mic input and a headphone jack, so you can put an external mic, like a Rode Video Mic Pro or something similar, on the camera, and you can monitor that audio, which is very useful. It also has clean HDMI out, so if you're using an external video recorder, like an Atomos unit, for example, you can get clean HDMI out, which is very useful. One thing to keep in mind, you do get some crop when shooting in 4K compared to 1080 or when taking a regular photo. This has been seen on some other cameras before, like the GH4 does this notably, but it is about a 1.5 times crop. So if you're shooting at 18 millimeters, for example, and you want to get a nice wide shot, keep in mind if you go to 4K, it's going to be a little bit more cropped in than if you weren't shooting in 4K. So just bear that in mind. So that's a quick first look at the Nikon D7500. We can definitely see that it blends some features from the D7200 below it and the D500 above it. Definitely some improvements over the D7200, like that tilting LCD screen and the greatly improved buffer on it over the D7200. And it gets close to some features on the D500, particularly looking at 4K video and similar. But the D500 certainly still is the higher tier camera of the two. But as I mentioned at the beginning, the D7500 is going to be coming in at a significantly less weight, so it's more portable, and also significantly less expensive. The D500 goes for about $3,000 here in Australia. This camera, the D7500, is going to be about $1,000 cheaper than that, so a not insignificant price point difference. I think it's going to be a good camera for someone who wants a camera with similar strength to the D500, something that's good at action, fast shooting, continuous shooting, and so on. But again, just doesn't want to pay that higher premium price point for the D500. The camera's going to be out in June. You can pre-order it now on our website at www.digidirect.com.au or in one of our stores. We've got stores in the Sydney CBD, Bondi Junction, Miranda, Chatswood, the Brisbane and Melbourne CBD, and Cannington, Western Australia. Thanks guys, take care.